Greetings, Internet people. I am Dr. FF and I like fanfiction. I have been reading fanfiction in one way or another since 2008, so I want to present some of my favorite fanfictions to you. Today, I am honored to recommend one of my many favorites. This one is called A Professor and a Student by LeDiz, a masterwork for the Pokemon anime fandom. I'll try to keep it light on spoilers, but there will be some spoilers. Let's begin by introducing the setting and our characters. In general, to understand the setting of a fanfiction is to understand its source material, which does much of the heavy lifting for it. The setting for this story is the Pokemon anime during the Sun and Moon seasons. For those who don't know what the Pokemon anime is about, do you even exist? It follows the story of Ash Ketchum, the eternal 10-year-old who seeks to be a Pokemon master by participating in the Pokemon League. The Sun and Moon seasons, to be more exact, take place in the Alola region, a place that is based on Hawaii. Ash goes there on vacation, but for reasons, ends up enrolling in the Pokemon school as a student and a boarder of Kukui. Now, it is important to point out that this was one of the biggest departures in the formula of the anime. Every prior season had Ash travel to a region with traveling companions. Now, he's staying in one place for the first time in the story. Not only that, but the Alola seasons were considered rather silly in artwork and plot, in comparison to the more serious and relatively mature Kalos season that preceded it. Remember this canon deviation is important to understanding this fanfic. There are two main characters to this story sharing the spotlight. The first is Professor Kukui. Professor Kukui has the honor of being the character we follow through A Professor and a Student. He is the titular professor who is the homeroom teacher to Ash's class. The entire narration is from his point of view. Kukui also takes some elements of his game counterpart, being also the Pokemon professor for Alola, doing research and admin minutia related to running a lab. Remember this fan-made deviation is important for this fanfic. And then we got the titular student, Ash Ketchum of Pallet Town. Ash here is portrayed as a hyperactive, enthusiastic, kind-hearted kid, like in the anime. But Kukui does not let us forget that he is also a veteran Pokemon trainer, which he is, both in the fanfic and the actual series. Remember this too. Now, why am I recommending this fanfic? Simply put, it is because of the theme underneath it all. A Professor and a Student offers an exploration of the character of Ash Ketchum, reconciling his various portrayals. Keep this in mind as we speak of all other elements to like in this fanfic. I said before that the Kalos seasons were some of the more serious the Pokemon anime and Ash got to be, while the Ash in Alola seemed rather silly. And we are not even mentioning the Ash we got in previous seasons. The author, LeDiz, manages to reconcile all these different interpretations of the character of Ash in a coherent manner to show us the Ash Ketchum both Kukui and the readers get to know. It asks the questions: who is Ash Ketchum and how he came to be? Kukui, soon after getting to know Ash, cannot help but be amazed by the things he says. This kid that has competed in multiple leagues and says the weirdest things with a straight face. He also cannot help believing in him and grow closer to Ash. There is even a part of him that ends up seeing Ash as a son, which becomes pretty obvious to pretty much everyone. Seriously, most adult characters end up teasing him with the moniker of Papa Kukui because of this. One of my favorite things in fiction is world building, and LeDiz very effectively uses Kukui's thoughts to sprinkle tidbits of world building. Of course, the purpose of the world building is to give us a model of normality in the Pokemon world to compare Ash to his peers. The professor presents to us through his narration what the average Pokemon journey will be like. A 1 year trip of self-discovery that ends with the trainer returning home, more mature, more worldly, and ready to dedicate themselves to whatever they will do the rest of their lives. But Ash is different. His journey has been different in that it has not ended, and by his own admission, may never end. He's in a professional Pokemon journey, and Kukui sees that, despite his silliness, and do remember Alola Ash was the silliest version of the character, he's a workaholic. I am not going to explain more on his thought process and other stuff on the first third of the story that relates to this. Read the fanfic. Another thing that I love about this fanfic, more so when comparing it to other Pokemon fanfiction, is that Ash feels like a child. How old Ash is has been debated by fans for years. But, at the very least, we can all agree that the anime wants us to see him as a kid. But for many fan fiction writers, they tend to write him as older and more mature, and that somehow has ended up in power fantasies. Now, I don't want to criticize power fantasies, I like some of them, but in Pokemon fan fiction, they have some very jarring common elements, such as Ash being an uber tiered trainer which wins all the leagues with only the best and most competitive Pokemon than that goes around catching legendary Pokemon. Or that he gets a harem with all of his traveling companions such as Misty and May, and also champions such as Cynthia. Or maybe there's some betrayal plot in which all his friends have betrayed him for some nonsensical reason and now he's back for revenge. All of these are quite common tropes in Pokemon fanfiction for some reason. But in A Professor and a Student, Ash is allowed to be immature and vulnerable and childish. He is a kid, a mature and worldly kid, but still someone that needs an adult. And he's still allowed to be powerful in a way that is more in character. This strength is at times a lot more spiritual. There is more than one occasion in which he is portrayed as a very spiritual person, and I could see the Ash in the anime being like that. Ash's spirituality and power is kind of a storyline for the middle third of the fanfic. Kukui discusses Ash with other characters such as the Kahunas Hala and Olivia, who comment much on Seide's spirituality and power. They even seem to regard Ash as suspicious because of it. It leads to another realization, but one that is more for the reader than for Kukui. I said before Ash's behavior is just different from other kids due to his Pokemon journey being different, didn't I? Well, that is just Kukui's theory, and while true, it's his adventures with legendary and mythical Pokemon that have also left a mark on the boy, for the better and for the worse. For example, for him, his fight with Tapu Koko in the anime is expected. We are shown in the fanfic how he trains afterwards, expecting to fight Tapu Koko again, because he knows that Tapu Koko is expecting something of him. But as Kukui explains, Tapu Koko is like a god to the Alolans, so the likes of Kukui don't really understand what Ash is talking about when he says Tapu Koko wants him to master sea moves. It's completely outside their frame of reference. This plotline comes to an end when Rockroof evolves to Lincoln Rock, and a bunch of stuff is said. Several things happen at once in that particular chapter regarding Ash's spirituality, his encounters with legendary Pokemon, and the fact that he is still a kid that needs an adult. Again, rip the fic. I am not spoiling everything for you guys. Let's wrap this up discussing the final storyline, which is the most original plotline here. It involves Kukui as the Pokemon professor for Alola. Most of the fanfic has characters from the anime, but Kukui has a team of scientists under his leadership that are very much original characters. At first, it's just a little more characterization for Kukui, and more adult characters for him to talk about Ash, until these researchers take an interest in Ash. I remind you that in Universe, all this happens after Kalos Luminosque conference, in which things got a little crazy. So some of the scientists want to talk to this kid who not only got to win second place in a Pokemon League in which Mega Evolutions are used without having any. And it seems he says a lot of other weird things. You know the ones. I am not going to spoil what happens exactly with all that. It is more than a bit weird, and it is definitely a very original plot point by LeDiz. But with it, we end the story seeing Ash from various perspectives. We saw him from the perspective of Kukui and his classmates as a child, the Kahunas as an object of legend, and finally the scientist as someone with abnormal power. All this gives us the emotional endnote of the entire fanfic. A heartfelt retelling of the entire Pokemon anime from Ash's own point of view. Ash allowing himself to let it all out and trust Kukui to just listen. We, as readers, who have watched his adventures for years, understand everything he's talking about. Every story and every legendary Pokemon that he... But for Kukui only has to understand Ash's feelings. And that becomes a really emotional moment for me. It finally answers the question, who is Ash Ketchum and how he came to be? And I think those were some very powerful questions to ask and that were well answered. If any of the things I said struck a chord in your heart, I hope you check A Professor and a Student. You will find it an endearing read. A Professor and a Student is already finished, and you can find this masterpiece in Archive of Our Own and fanfiction.net. As for me, like, subscribe, ring the bell, leave your comments down below. I am new to this, don't really know how to make videos, I'm just experimenting and trying what I can, but I will try to make another one soon. I will focus on my old favorites first, but if you recommend something, any fanfiction, I'll try to check it out and maybe make a video. Dr. FF out.